After sending her husband on a business trip, Grace decided to call him from her neighbor's phone to check on him. And what she heard almost made her drop the phone. "Hello, my dears. Put your affairs aside for a minute. I want to tell a story that might help you see your loved ones in a new light. Write in the comments where you're watching from. We wish you pleasant listening." Grace was slowly climbing the stairs, counting the steps like she did as a child. 37, 38. The building, of course, had an elevator. What kind of luxury new build would it be otherwise? But today she wanted to delay the inevitable return to the empty apartment. 39, 40. The staircase was perfectly clean, just like the entire showy building with its marble lobby finishes and a doorman at the entrance. Who needs all this, she thought for the umpteenth time. On the fifth-floor landing stood her neighbor, Lillian Everly, a retiree who had moved here to live with her businessman son. The old lady was walking a tiny Pomeranian that was straining its leash toward the elevator. "Good afternoon, Thalia," the neighbor nodded amiably. "Walking the stairs today. Is the elevator broken again?" No, I just felt like walking," Grace smiled weakly. She stopped, looking at the grey-haired woman with kind eyes. Lillian Everly was the only one in this building who treated her like a human being, without condescending glances. Her son had bought her the apartment next door, but he rarely visited. Always busy, business trips, just like Henry, her husband. Always business trips. "I hope we don't fall behind on the mortgage payments with all his traveling," Grace thought with anxiety, remembering the latest bank statement. 15 years. 15 long years to pay off this enormous debt for an apartment that still felt alien to her. Grace swallowed the lump in her throat. Business trips. For the last 3 days, Henry had been on another business trip, and again hadn't answered his phone when she called. "In meetings from morning till night, Masha, you understand? I can't get distracted," he would explain later. She used to believe him, but lately a worm of doubt had been gnawing at her soul. These meetings coincided with her calls too often, too conveniently. "Lillian, can I use your phone?" The words escaped on their own. "Mine's dead and I need to call my mom." After her surgery, Grace herself was surprised by her lie. Her mother hadn't had any surgery. She lived in Saratov and they last spoke a month ago, but an inner voice insistently demanded, "Check on him." Check. Lillian Everly looked at her intently. "Is something wrong? You look pale." No, I'm just tired," Grace tried to smile. "It's chaos at work, and now my phone dies on me." While the neighbor rummaged in her enormous bag, reminiscent of a shuttle trader's suitcase from the 90s, Grace replayed the events of the last few months in her head. It all started after Henry's promotion. He began coming home late. He smelled of expensive perfume. "Corporate events, client meetings," he explained. Then these endless weekend business trips began. And lately, he had stopped answering her calls altogether. "We used to call each other 10 times a day," Grace remembered. He would call just to say he loved me, loved me. When was the last time she heard those words from him? When was the last time they were intimate as husband and wife? Grace winced. Probably since Sarah was born, almost 10 years ago, their intimate life had gradually dwindled to nothing. First, it was explained by her fatigue after childbirth, then by his workload. And for the last 2 years, they had even slept in separate rooms. "Here, just don't talk long. I have a senior plan." Lillian Everly handed over an old Nokia with worn-out buttons, which she kept for important calls. "Thank you, I'll be quick." Grace moved to the window so the neighbor wouldn't hear the conversation. Outside was a view of the playground, empty on a weekday, with its impeccably clean grounds and expensive play structures. She remembered how Henry had enthusiastically shown her this playground when persuading her to take the mortgage for the apartment. "Imagine how great it will be for Sarah here. Not like in our old yard, syringes and bottles." But their daughter preferred to play in the yard at her grandmother's place, in the old neighborhood with its shabby swings and sandbox, where she had friends left. Here, in the elite complex, Sarah never made any friends. Maybe that's why she became so withdrawn. Grace dialed the familiar number and froze. 3 rings, 4, 5. Not answering again, she thought bitterly. Usually Henry didn't answer but called back an hour later from a different number. "Sorry, was in a meeting, couldn't talk." Her finger was already reaching for the end call button when a click sounded in the receiver. My sunshine. I've missed you terribly. Her husband's voice, tender and caring, which she hadn't heard in many months, hit her like a cold shower. My kitten. How are you there? All alone. Grace felt her fingers go numb. The phone almost slipped from her hand. She couldn't utter a word. A lump seemed stuck in her throat, preventing her from breathing. Her heart was pounding so hard, it felt like the whole stairwell could hear it. Hello? Why are you silent? Henry's voice changed, became wary. Hello? Who is this? She ended the call and leaned against the wall, feeling her legs give way. Her temples throbbed. Dark spots swam before her eyes. So that's it. So all this time. Who is this woman? How long has it been? Maybe since he started staying late at work. A recent memory flashed in her mind. A month ago, Henry had mentioned in passing a new neighbor from the building across the street. Imagine, she's some kind of model or singer, bought herself a red Ferrari. Grace had been surprised then. She'd lived here a year and had never seen this neighbor. But Henry somehow knew about her car. Could it be? What's wrong with you? Lillian Everly approached, looking at her neighbor with concern. You're white as a sheet. Your heart, blood pressure, I have pills. Valerian, Corvalol. Everything's fine, Grace answered mechanically, returning the phone. Thank you, Lillian. I'm just tired. You should rest, girl. The old lady shook her head. You've completely run yourself ragged. Working nights, the house, the child during the day. And where's your husband? Off traveling again? Yes, a business trip, Grace squeezed out, feeling nausea rise in her throat at the word. Oh, men, sighed Lillian Everly, you just look after your health. Medicine is so expensive now. My Bob, God rest his soul, he just worked, and then bam, a heart attack. Our old Chevy didn't get him to the hospital in time. Grace nodded absently, barely hearing the old woman's lamentations. One thought was spinning in her head. He's cheating on me. All this time, saying goodbye to her neighbor, she went up to the apartment. A huge 3-bedroom by the standards of her childhood, with the designer renovation Henry was so proud of. Euro standard, get it? Not like at your mother's place, flower-patterned wallpaper. Now this Euro standard seemed alien and cold to her, like a hotel room. At home, she mechanically turned on the kettle, sat down at the table, and stared at one point. Her husband's voice echoed in her head. My sunshine. I've missed you terribly. My kitten. When was the last time he called her such names? 5 years ago? 7? The kettle clicked and turned off. Grace didn't move. Sarah, their 9-year-old daughter, was due back from school in an hour. What should she tell her? How to live on? What will I do if we get divorced? Grace thought with horror. Her dispatcher's salary was barely enough for the mortgage payments. Without Henry's help, she and Sarah simply wouldn't survive. And moving out of this apartment meant losing everything invested over the years. The last 2 years, she and Henry had slept in separate rooms. I don't get enough sleep because of your night shifts, he explained. She had to work nights as a taxi dispatcher to handle the exorbitant mortgage for the apartment he insisted on buying in this elite area. The apartment that consumed almost her entire salary, while Henry spent his on expensive suits, watches, restaurants, and apparently on his kitten. Sarah needs a good environment, a prestigious school, Henry convinced her. And as a result, their daughter suffered from classmates' teasing, who unmistakably sensed that Sarah's family didn't fit in with the local elite. Your mom is a taxi driver, and your dad? A driver. Why do you wear the same dress for the 2nd year? Sarah didn't tell her, but Grace saw her daughter's eyes red from tears when picking her up from school. Once, Sarah came home with a torn backpack. I fell, she muttered in response to questions. But Grace didn't believe her. The damage was too characteristic. Someone had clearly done it on purpose. When Grace tried to talk to the homeroom teacher, she just smiled politely. You know, we have very prosperous children from good families here. Maybe your girl just isn't used to such schools. Grace walked to the window. The view opened to the neighboring building, just as expensive, with an illuminated facade. That's where that model or singer lives, she remembered Henry's words. On the 3rd floor, the windows were lit. Grace squinted. She thought she could make out the silhouette of a tall woman. Maybe she's the one Henry calls Sunshine and Kitten. Grace had never seen this neighbor, different schedules. When the neighbor returned from parties, Grace was already asleep before her night shift. And when Grace came home from work at dawn, the whole building was still asleep. But Henry, with his normal schedule, could easily cross paths with her. What am I thinking? Grace checked herself. Maybe it's just some mistake. Maybe Henry misunderstood which number was calling. Decided to joke, but the inner voice insisted, "You understood everything correctly, you've been betrayed." Her phone vibrated, a message from her boss. "You're with the new guy, Jack, today. Show him the ropes. Car number 12. A clunker, of course, but it's all we have. Shift starts at 2300. Grace sighed. Night shift. Again, sitting until morning in the smoky dispatch office, assigning orders, listening to drivers complain about potholed roads and rude passengers, and she still needed to decide what to do about Henry, about this betrayal, about their life. She glanced at the wedding photo on the wall. Happy young faces. They were 23 then. He worked as a simple manager in a trading company. She was a phone operator at a travel agency. They rented a one-bedroom in an old 5-story walk-up on the outskirts, ate cheap pasta, but were happy. They got trips to Turkey at cost, thanks to her job. They drank cheap wine on the balcony, dreamed about the future. "We'll have kids, buy a house in the suburbs, get a dog," Henry dreamed, hugging her. "Maybe even 2, she laughed. Then everything seemed possible. Then she believed their love was forever. When did everything change? 3 years ago, Henry got a promotion, became a department head. They decided to take the mortgage, to finally get out of that old house, as he said. That's when he started to change. New suits, expensive watches, business dinners, new friends, people with status whom he needed to maintain relationships with. And now this. The front door slammed. Sarah was back. Earlier than usual, there was still an hour left of school. "Mom, why are you home?" her daughter asked, surprised, dropping her backpack on the floor. Thin, pale, with a heavy gaze, not childlike at all. "Decided to leave early," Grace tried to smile. "Why aren't you in school?" "PE was cancelled," Sarah muttered, avoiding her gaze. "The teacher is sick." Grace knew her daughter was lying. She knew that look away, those nervous movements all too well. Just like when Sarah said she'd lost an expensive jacket, stolen in the locker room, or when she explained why she didn't go to the school concert. My stomach hurt. But now Grace didn't have the strength to question her. First, she needed to sort out her own life, which had just shattered into pieces from one phone call. "Are you hungry?" she asked, getting up from the table. "I made soup this morning." "Not hungry." Sarah headed to her room. "I have homework." Just like me as a child, Grace thought. She also didn't like to talk about school problems. Her father drank. There was never enough money. Classmates teased her for her old clothes, for bringing sandwiches instead of money for the cafeteria. Teachers looked at her with poorly concealed pity. The daughter of an alcoholic. What can you expect? Was everything repeating for Sarah? Only instead of a drinking father, a cheating father. Grace closed her eyes. What to do now? Make a scene? Get a divorce? How will they live? A 15-year mortgage? The payment? Almost her entire salary. Where would she go with a child? Back to her mother in Saratov. She remembered her grandmother's words. "All men are dogs, but you mustn't destroy the family. Endure, girl. Endure for the children." That's what her mother had done, enduring her father's drinking binges, his affairs. But it didn't make it easier for anyone. Her father left anyway when she was 15, for a young salesgirl from the liquor department, and her mother was left alone with 2 children, embittered at the whole world. "No," Grace said firmly to herself, "I won't endure. But I won't act in haste either. I need to find out everything, gather evidence, make a plan. Then decide." She caught herself thinking that she didn't even feel pain from the betrayal, only fatigue and emptiness. Maybe because their marriage had long since become a formality. When was the last time they went somewhere together, not counting parent-teacher conferences, talked heart to heart, made love? That former Henry, cheerful, loving, had disappeared long ago, replaced by this groomed, perpetually busy stranger in an expensive suit. I'm not even surprised, Grace thought bitterly, looking at the wedding photo, but it didn't make it easier. Because ahead lay uncertainty and a very difficult conversation with her daughter. Grace shook herself. Enough feeling sorry for myself. I need to pull myself together. Picking up the phone, she dialed her mother-in-law's number. Nora Prescott, hello, how are you? Getting by, Grace. Her mother-in-law's voice sounded warm. Strangely, she and Henry's mother had always gotten along well. How are you? Has Henry returned? Not yet. Grace paused. Listen, Nora Prescott, maybe I could send Sarah to you for the weekend. She's worn out from school and I'm on nights. Of course, bring her. Her mother-in-law was delighted. I'll bake pies. We'll go to the theatre. I haven't seen my granddaughter in ages. Thank you so much. Then I'll bring her tomorrow. Hanging up, Grace felt relief. At least Sarah would be safe when she… What? What was she going to do? Follow her husband, catch him red-handed? First, she needed to find out who she was, Grace decided, and that required time and help. Her salary. While Henry spent his on expensive suits, watches, restaurants, and apparently on his kitten. Sarah needs a good environment, a prestigious school, Henry had insisted. And as a result, their daughter suffered from classmates teasing, who unmistakably sensed that Sarah's family didn't fit in with the local elite. Your mom is a taxi driver, and your dad, a driver. Sarah didn't tell her, but Grace saw her daughter's eyes red from tears when picking her up from school. Grace walked to the window. The view opened to the neighboring building, just as expensive with its illuminated facade. They say some model or singer lives there. She moved in about a year ago. Grace had never seen her. Different schedules. When the neighbor returned from parties, Grace was already asleep before her night shift. And when Grace came home from work at dawn, the whole building was still asleep. Her phone vibrated. A message from her boss. You're with the new guy, Jack, today. Show him everything. Car number 12. A clunker, of course, but it's all we have. Shift starts at 2300. Grace sighed. Night shift. Again, sitting until morning in the smoky dispatch office, assigning orders, listening to drivers complain about potholed roads and rude passengers. And she still needed to decide what to do about Henry, about this betrayal, about their life. She glanced at the wedding photo on the wall. Happy young faces. They were 23 then. He worked as a simple manager in a trading company. She was a phone operator at a travel agency. They rented a one-bedroom in an old 5-story walk-up on the outskirts, ate cheap pasta, but were happy. They got trips to Turkey at cost thanks to her job. They drank cheap wine on the balcony, dreamed about the future. When did everything change? 3 years ago, Henry got a promotion, became a department head. They decided to take the mortgage, to finally get out of that old house, as he said. That's when he started to change. New suits, expensive watches, business dinners, new friends, people with status whom he needed to maintain relationships with. And now this. The front door slammed. Sarah was back. Earlier than usual, there was still an hour left of school. Mum, why are you home? Her daughter asked, surprised, dropping her backpack on the floor. Thin, pale, with a heavy gaze, not childlike at all. Decided to leave early, Grace tried to smile. Why aren't you in school? PE was cancelled, Sarah muttered, avoiding her gaze. The teacher is sick. Grace knew her daughter was lying, but now she didn't have the strength to question her. First, she needed to sort out her own life, which had just shattered into pieces from one phone call. Are you hungry? She asked, getting up from the table. I made soup this morning. Not hungry, Sarah headed to her room. I have homework. Just like me as a child, Grace thought. She also didn't like to talk about school problems. Her father drank, there was never enough money. Classmates teased her for her old clothes, for bringing sandwiches instead of money for the cafeteria. Was everything repeating for Sarah? Only instead of a drinking father, a cheating father. Grace closed her eyes. What to do now? Make a scene? Get a divorce? How will they live? A 15-year mortgage? The payment? Almost her entire salary. Where would she go with the child? Back to her mother in Saratov? She remembered her grandmother's words. All men are dogs, but you mustn't destroy the family. Endure, girl. That's what her mother had done, enduring her father's drinking binges, his affairs. But it didn't make it easier for anyone. No, Grace said firmly to herself, I won't endure, but I won't act in haste either. I need to find out everything, gather evidence, make a plan, and then decide. In the evening, Grace was getting ready for work. The TV was quietly humming in the kitchen, some series was on, but Sarah was staring at the screen with an unseeing gaze. I'm leaving, Sunshine. Grace kissed her daughter on the top of her head. Dad will be back tomorrow morning. He'll call you. Don't stay up late. School tomorrow. At the mention of school, Sarah winced but said nothing. Maybe I should send you to Grandma's for the weekend after all, Grace asked carefully. You'll rest, take your mind off things. Don't want to, Sarah cut her off. I have classes here, English. Since when do you love classes? Grace thought but didn't say it out loud. Something was happening to her girl, something not good. Maybe problems at school, maybe bullying. Kids in these elite schools can be very cruel to those not from their circle. Okay, as you wish. She kissed her daughter again. Call me if anything, any time. Leaving the apartment, Grace suddenly remembered she had forgotten to take sandwiches with her. She didn't want to go back. Bad omen. Oh well, I'll buy something on the way, she decided. Near the elevator stood a young woman, a tall, well-groomed blonde in a tight dress and stiletto heels. She was waiting for the elevator, tapping her foot nervously. Good evening, Grace greeted politely. The woman gave her an indifferent look, nodded barely perceptibly, and turned away, demonstratively looking at her reflection in the elevator's mirrored door. She smelled of expensive perfume, the same scent Grace sometimes caught on Henry. Is it her? A panicked thought flashed. That model from the neighboring building. The elevator doors opened and they stepped inside. The woman pressed the button for the first floor. Grace did the same. They rode in silence. Grace stole glances at her fellow passenger. Beautiful, well-maintained, about 30, a large diamond ring on her ring finger. Clearly not struggling, Grace noted. In the lobby, the woman, without looking back, walked towards the exit. Grace followed her. She also needed to go to the bus stop. A black SUV pulled around the corner. The window rolled down and Grace saw Henry's colleague Lucas at the wheel. Emma, sorry I'm late. He smiled at the blonde. Let's go quickly, they're waiting for us. The woman gracefully slid into the front seat, kissed Lucas on the cheek. You know how much I hate waiting, she drawled capriciously. I was about to call a taxi. The car sped off, and Grace remained standing, looking after it in confusion. So it's not her. That's Lucas's wife. She felt ashamed of her suspicions. On the other hand, Grace thought, walking to the bus stop, even if it's not her, that doesn't mean Henry isn't cheating, just with someone else. On the way to work, Grace kept thinking about the conversation with Henry. Sunshine kitten. Who is this woman? Where did he meet her? A co-worker? A client? She went through her husband's acquaintances in her mind, but couldn't imagine who it could be. In recent years, she had almost no contact with his colleagues. He stopped inviting her to corporate events. It's boring. They only talk about work there, he brushed her off. The night city flashed by outside the bus windows. Bright storefronts, neon signs. She preferred not to take taxis, even though she worked as a dispatcher. Too expensive, and they had to sell their personal car when they took the mortgage. They used to have an old Lada. Henry bought it second-hand, fixed the engine himself. How proud he was. How he loved tinkering with it in the yard, all covered in grease. Then he became embarrassed by that car, said it didn't match his status. Sold it. The money went to the down payment for the apartment. Now he dreamed of a Lexus, but drove a company Toyota for now. When did he manage to change so much? When did he become a stranger? The taxi depot was located on the outskirts in an industrial zone. A few shabby hangars fenced off, cars were repaired and serviced there. In one of the buildings was the dispatch office, a cramped, smoky room with several computers. Oh, Masha, hello. Bella Wilson, a plump woman of pre-retirement age, waved joyfully at her. They had worked the same shift for 2 years, and Bella had become like an older friend to Grace. I thought maybe you weren't coming. I heard your better half is back. Grace froze. How do you know? Well, he called today, asked about your schedule for the weekend. Bella was surprised. Said he's preparing a surprise for you. A romantic dinner or something. He sounded so pleased, just glowing. To cover up his cheating, Grace thought bitterly, but said out loud, "Ah, yes." He returned from his business trip. "You're lucky with your man," Bella sighed, laying out a card solitaire on the table. "Mine just sits on the couch and guzzles beer. And yours, makes money, thinks about his wife, and travels on business, doesn't spare himself." "If only you knew who he spares and what kind of business trips those are," Grace wanted to say, but she remained silent. "Okay, I'll go change." She headed to the utility room that served as a locker room. So that's why he called, Grace thought, changing into her work uniform, a blue shirt with the company logo. He wanted to make sure I wouldn't be home, probably planning to bring her somewhere. To our house, with Sarah home. The thought made her feel sick. No, unlikely. More likely, he wanted to know if he could slip away unnoticed for a business meeting on the weekend while I'm at work. But why was he so sure she wouldn't suspect anything? Or was this already routine for him? When she returned to the dispatch office, there was another person there. A man about 35, lean, with intelligent eyes and a neat beard. He wore a worn denim jacket, clearly not new but clean and neatly darned at the elbow. In his hands, he held a worn artificial leather briefcase, the kind that was in fashion 20 years ago. "Mash, meet Jack, the new guy." Bella waved her hand. "Jack, this is Grace, our senior dispatcher. She'll teach you everything." The man bowed slightly. "Very nice, Jack Sawyer." "Grace." She shook the offered hand. The handshake was firm, confident. "Have you worked in taxi dispatch before?" "No, I'm actually an engineer by training," Jack smiled. Wrinkles gathered at the corners of his eyes. Crow's feet. "Designed ventilation systems for 20 years, but life makes adjustments." There was something in his gaze. Weariness, resignation, but also some inner strength. He's had it rough too, Grace thought. "Well, let me show you around." She nodded towards an empty desk with a computer. "This will be your spot." "Our system is simple." For the next hour, she explained the basics to the newcomer, showed him the order reception program, shift schedules, route specifics. Jack grasped everything quickly, asked intelligent questions. Clearly not a fool, Grace noted to herself. "And which car did you get?" she asked, finishing the instructions. "Number 12, a Lada 7, he smiled. "You should have seen my son's face when I told him I'd be taxing in a 7. He's 16, dreams of a Tesla. Do you have a son?" Somehow this fact surprised Grace. "Yes, Daniel, lives with his mother in St. Petersburg." Jack's face darkened slightly. "My wife and I divorced 2 years ago. She found someone richer." He said it without anger, just stating a fact. "I'm sorry," Grace was embarrassed. "I didn't mean to pry. It's fine." He shrugged. "That's life. Life goes on." She liked that phrase, simple but accurate. Life did indeed go on, no matter what happened. And she had to decide how to live hers. The start of the shift was hectic. Friday, lots of calls. Drivers called continuously, clarifying addresses, complaining about traffic and customers. Jack settled in quickly, helped take orders, even joked sometimes, quietly, intelligently. Grace caught herself thinking that for the first time in a long time, she felt calm and even enjoyed working. Around 1 in the morning, there was a lull. Bella went out for a smoke. She and Jack were left alone. "How long have you worked here?" he asked, handing her a cup of tea. 3 years, Grace nodded gratefully. "Since we took the mortgage. My salary as a travel agency operator wasn't enough for the payments." "Mortgage is serious," Jack nodded understandingly. "I went through that myself, though after the divorce, I had to sell everything, divide the property. You know, like in that saying, 2 things you shouldn't give to anyone, your wife and your lunch. Everything else is fine." Grace smiled involuntarily. Jack had a special sense of humor, subtle, a bit sad. "And where do you live now?" she asked curiously. "Returned to my hometown, living in my grandfather's house on the outskirts," he smiled. "Nothing fancy, of course, but it's mine. Granddad was a craftsman, golden hands. Built it himself, furnished it himself. There's even a safe in the wall. Granddad kept the most valuable things there." "What was so valuable there?" Grace smiled. "Don't know." He shrugged. "He died when I was 12, didn't leave the combination. Or he did, but it got lost somewhere. Maybe a couple of gold coins hidden. Or some family heirlooms. Doesn't matter. I keep tools there, various valuable bits and pieces. The phone rang. A driver. Jack picked up, and Grace suddenly caught herself thinking that she felt good next to this almost stranger. Calm, safe, as if they'd known each other for years. Number 12. Listening, she heard. Yes, I'm the new guy. Understood. I'll be right there. Got the address. Jack hung up. Got a customer, he explained. In an upscale neighborhood, says it's urgent. Hope it's not a prank. Newbies often get those, Grace nodded. They call, then don't show up. Or worse, switchers. What are switchers? Jack didn't understand. Those who call a cheap taxi, but then ask to stop at an expensive restaurant on the way, like, I'll just be a minute. But they stay there. The driver loses time and money. Got it, Jack nodded. I'll keep that in mind. He left, and Grace returned to work, but her thoughts were far away. How was Sarah? Asleep? Or, as usual, sitting under the blanket with her tablet? And where was Henry? Really on a business trip? Or... The phone rang again, interrupting her thoughts. Dispatch. Listening. Grace, it's me. A hoarse voice sounded in the receiver. She recognized Huxley, an old driver. Listen, I was driving past your house. Thought I'd drop by. Grace tensed. What's wrong? Nothing much, he chuckled. Just saw your hubby show up. Not alone, by the way, with some woman. I recognized him right away. You showed photos at New Year's. Grace froze, her temples pounded. Are you sure? 100%. He was dropping her off from a taxi right at the building entrance, all businesslike in his suit. And she's not bad, curvy, in heels. Long hair, really blonde. That blonde from the elevator, the thought flashed. Lucas's wife. Is she tall, in a blue dress? Grace asked, feeling her mouth go dry. Nah, seemed like red or burgundy or something. Didn't get a good look. It's dark already. Well, I thought. Maybe you didn't know. Thanks, Huxley, Grace answered mechanically. He told me he was giving a female colleague a ride. Their meeting ran late. Yeah, a meeting, Huxley laughed. We know those kinds of meetings. Okay, bye. Just as a friend. He hung up and Grace sat there, the receiver. So that's it. So that's how it is. He's not even hiding it much. Brought her home, with the child there. She grabbed her mobile, dialed her daughter's number. Long rings. No answer, asleep or wearing headphones. Something wrong? Bella returned from her smoke break, looking intently at Grace's pale face. No, everything's fine, she tried to smile. Just Sarah's not picking up. I'm worried. Ah, Bella drawled, but she's with her father. What are you worried about? She's not alone. Grace nodded. Only one thought was spinning in her head. How could he? With the child there. The phone rang again. Jack. Hello, Grace? His voice sounded excited. Listen, there's a situation here. The customer turned out to be, well, it's your address. And there's, not a very good situation. What happened? Grace's heart began to race wildly. A man, he's not quite sober, and a woman with him. They had a fight, seems very loud. And some girl ran out of the apartment crying. Sarah. Grace jumped up. Tall, thin, in pink pajamas. Yes, Jack confirmed. She's sitting in the stairwell. I can see her from here. Probably freezing, still crying. I'm afraid to approach her. She might think I'm some kind of maniac. Could you come? Huh? Now. Grace felt nausea rising in her throat. I'm on my way. She turned to Bella. Bella, I have an emergency at home. Need to go urgently. Can you handle it alone? What happened? Bella was alarmed. I'll explain later. Grace was already putting on her jacket. Sorry, I really need to go. Go, of course. Bella waved her hands. I'll manage. Jack will be back soon. We'll manage somehow. Grace ran out onto the street. Night, the outskirts. Not a single car in sight, of course. A 15-minute walk to the bus stop, and who knew if buses were even running anymore? A familiar Lada pulled around the corner, an old 7, number 12. Get in. Jack opened the door. I came back for you. Thought it would be faster. Thank you, Grace exhaled, climbing into the front seat. They raced through the night streets. Grace was wringing her hands nervously. "How is she?" Grace asked. "Don't know exactly," Jack shook his head. "I was called to your building. When I got there, this man, your husband, right, was standing by the entrance, shouting something. There was a woman with him. Then he went inside, and 5 minutes later the girl ran out. Barefoot, can you imagine? Just in pajamas." Grace closed her eyes. "God, what happened there?" "Listen," Jack said carefully, "if you need help, I understand. We barely know each other, but still." "Thank you." She smiled weakly. "You're very kind." The rest of the way, they drove in silence. Finally, the car stopped at the familiar building entrance. Grace jumped out before Jack could turn, off the engine. Only one thought was pounding in her head. "Sarah, my girl." Sarah was sitting on the stairs between floors, curled up in a ball, hugging her knees. Her bare feet were red from the cold. Hearing footsteps, she lifted her tear-stained face. "Mom!" The girl cried out and rushed to Grace. "Sarah, sunshine!" Grace hugged her daughter tightly, feeling her tremble. "What happened? Why are you here?" "Papa," Sarah sobbed. "He came with that auntie. They were noisy, and then he kicked me out of the room." Grace felt everything inside her boiling. "Did he hit you?" she asked quietly, holding her daughter at arm's length and peering into her face. "No," Sarah shook her head. "He just yelled. Told me to go to sleep and not bother them talking." "And they?" "They weren't talking. They were kissing." "I saw." Grace closed her eyes. "So that's how it is. Brought his mistress home. With the child there?" "Mom, it's that auntie." "She's so pretty," Sarah said quietly, "and her perfume is expensive. Don't be mad at Papa, okay? It's not his fault." Grace looked at her daughter in surprise. "What? She's defending her father." "Why do you say that?" she asked. "Because," Sarah lowered her eyes. "David at school explained, his dad lives with another auntie too. David says it's because men need beautiful women. And his mom is ugly and fat. And you?" She trailed off. "And me too?" Grace asked quietly. Sarah was silent, but that was enough. Grace felt a lump rise in her throat. Was her 9-year-old daughter already seeing the world like this? Did she really believe that men only need beautiful women and the others can be deceived and humiliated? "Let's go," she took her daughter's hand. "I'll take you to Grandma's." "And Papa?" "I'll talk to Papa," Grace said firmly. They went down to the car. Jack was waiting near the entrance, tactfully turned away as if not wanting to intrude on their conversation. "Everything all right?" he asked, seeing them. "Should I call the police?" "No, thank you." Grace shook her head. "We'll manage. Can you take us to Sadovaya Street? It's not far from here." "Of course," Jack nodded, opening the back door. Sarah climbed onto the seat, tucking her bare feet under her. Grace sat next to her, hugged her daughter, wrapped her in her own jacket. "Here." Jack handed over an old blanket he apparently kept in the car for emergencies. "She needs to warm up." "Thank you." Grace nodded gratefully. They drove in silence the whole way. Sarah, exhausted by the experience, dozed off on her mother's shoulder. Grace stroked her head, examining her thin profile. Just like Henry, she thought bitterly. The same cheekbones, the same eye shape. How could he do this to her? How could he betray them both? "Is this your old neighborhood?" Jack asked as they entered the old district with its 5-story Khrushchev-era apartments. "Yes, my mother-in-law lives here." Grace nodded. "You probably moved from a place like this to that new development," Jack assumed. "Exactly," she smiled sadly. 3 years ago." "You're perceptive." Jack hesitated. "I've seen many such stories. A person breaks out of their familiar environment and then becomes a snob and a traitor." Grace smiled bitterly. "Not always," Jack objected tactfully, "but often people change when their surroundings change. I'm not justifying your husband. Just, sorry for getting you involved in all this," Jack suddenly said, looking at them in the rearview mirror. "I didn't know it was your apartment. Just when I saw the crying child." "You did the right thing," Grace said quietly. "Thank you." They pulled up to an old 5-story building, her mother-in-law's house. Lights were on in the windows despite the late hour. Nora Prescott probably wasn't asleep, watching a series or knitting. "Wait, please," Grace asked Jack. "I'll be quick." She woke Sarah and led her to the entrance. Her mother-in-law opened the door immediately, as if waiting by it. "Grace, Sarah, what happened?" the elderly woman exclaimed, seeing her tearful granddaughter in pajamas. "I'll explain later," Grace said quietly. "Sarah will stay with you tonight, okay? Maybe for a couple of days." "But what's happened?" Her mother-in-law wouldn't let up. "Where's Henry?" "At home," Grace cut her off. "I'm going to sort things out with him." "Nora Prescott, please look after Sarah. She needs to rest." "Of course, dear," she fussed. "I'll run her a bath, make some tea with honey." "But what? You look pale. What happened?" "Later." Grace leaned down to her daughter. "You stay with Grandma." "Okay, I'll come soon." Sarah nodded. She seemed detached, as if it wasn't happening to her. "Call if anything." Grace kissed her daughter on the forehead and left. Jack was waiting in the car. Seeing her, he started the engine. "Where to now?" he asked. "Home," Grace said firmly. "I need to talk to my husband." She got into the front seat, buckled up. Her hands were shaking. "Listen," Jack began carefully. "I know it's none of my business, but are you sure you want to go there now? Maybe it's better in the morning, when everyone has calmed down." "No." Grace shook her head. "If I don't do this now, I never will." Jack nodded understandingly and started driving. "You know," he suddenly said, "when I found out my wife was cheating on me, I also wanted to sort it out immediately. I went to them. She'd been living at her lover's for a week already. Burst into the apartment, wanted to punch his face in." "And what?" Grace turned to him. "What happened?" "Well, nothing," he smirked. "Turns out he was a master of sports in boxing. I hadn't thought of that. Woke up in the ER with a concussion and a broken nose. And they threw all my stuff out on the staircase and changed the locks." Grace smiled involuntarily. "Not the best way to resolve a conflict." "Exactly," Jack nodded. "That's why I'm saying maybe wait, cool down so it doesn't get worse," Grace thought. What was she planning to do exactly? Yell, make a scene, fight her husband's mistress, throw Henry's things out the door? "Maybe you're right," she finally said, "but I still need to go home. At least to pack some things, documents. And anyway, it's my apartment. Why should I leave?" "That's true too," Jack agreed, "but maybe I should come up with you. Just in case." "No, no," Grace answered hastily. "You've already done so much for us. I don't want to drag you into our problems." "As you wish," he shrugged. "But if anything, call. You have my number." He stopped the car near her building entrance. The windows of their fifth-floor apartment were lit. So Henry wasn't asleep yet, or him and his mistress. Grace pushed the thought away. "Thank you," she extended her hand to Jack, "for everything. Don't mention it." He shook her hand firmly. "Take care of yourself. And remember, life goes on, no matter what happens." Grace nodded and got out of the car. Jack waited until she entered the building before driving away. Riding up in the elevator, Grace tried to gather her thoughts. What would she say to Henry? How would she act? The plan she had been mulling over all day, gather evidence, make a plan, had collapsed when she saw a tearful Sarah in the stairwell. Now there was no time for strategies. Now she had to act. Outside her apartment door, she stopped and listened. Quiet. Maybe they were already asleep or had left. Grace took out her keys, but the door was unlocked. She carefully entered. The light was on in the hallway. An expensive-looking woman's coat hung on the rack. Elegant stiletto heels on the floor. Voices could be heard in the living room. Henry and a woman were arguing about something. "You promised to divorce her," the woman was saying. Her voice was young, with capricious notes. "How long do I have to wait?" "Emma," I explained. Henry was trying to calm her. "Now is not the time. The mortgage, the child. Let's at least wait until spring." "Emma?" Grace was surprised. "That blonde from the elevator, Lucas's wife?" "I'm tired of waiting." The woman's voice grew louder. "I'm tired of being the mistress. Do you understand how humiliating that is? I have to hide, lie. And that wife of yours? She doesn't even understand what you're like. Why do you need her?" "Masha, the mother of my child," Henry sighed. "And anyway, she's a good person. We're just different. She holds us back, into this poverty, this domestic drudgery. I want to live. Understand?" Grace clenched her fists. "So that's how it is?" She's holding him back into poverty. And who slaved away at night to pay his damn mortgage. And I don't let you live. The woman's voice turned icy. You think I don't see how you look at the new director's secretary, the redhead one? What, are you jealous? Irritation crept into Henry's voice. I'm just maintaining business relationships. I need to move up the career ladder. And you? And me what? The woman snapped. You're empty, Emma, Henry suddenly said tiredly. Beautiful, bright, but empty. A consumer. You always want something. A car, a fur coat, a trip. What can you give? Oh, really? Emma shrieked. So I'm empty. And your wife is deep. A dispatcher for a shitty taxi company. She's an uneducated fool. You told me yourself she didn't even finish college. Grace couldn't listen anymore. She pushed the door open and walked into the living room. Good evening, she said calmly, looking at Henry and his mistress, the same blonde from the elevator, who froze in surprise. Sorry to interrupt your business conversation. Masha? Henry jumped up from the couch, his face contorted. You weren't supposed to… Wasn't supposed to what? Grace asked calmly. Come home? Or find out that my husband brings his mistress into my home with my child present? She glanced around the living room, an open bottle of expensive cognac on the coffee table, 2 glasses, chocolate candies. A romantic evening then. It's not what you think, Henry began, but Emma interrupted him. Oh, come on, stop lying. She tossed her head. Yes, I'm his mistress. So what? We love each other. And you're not needed. Haven't been for a long time. Grace looked at her. Emma was indeed beautiful. Long blonde hair, sharp features, a model's figure, groomed and expensive, like an Italian porcelain figurine. Emma, shut up, Henry hissed. Let me handle this. What's to handle? Emma rose from the couch, swaying her hips, walked over to Henry and put her hand on his shoulder. Tell her the truth, that you love me, that you're going to divorce her. Where's Sarah? Henry suddenly asked, looking around confusedly. At your mother's, Grace said coldly. Do you even understand what you've done? She saw you kissing. A 9-year-old child, Henry. What nonsense. He tried to feign outrage. We weren't kissing, we were just talking. Emma is my colleague. Really? Grace smiled bitterly. And I thought, the new director's secretary, that redhead you've been eyeing. Emma jerked away from Henry. What? Her voice rang with fury. What did she say? What redhead? Emma, she's making it all up. Henry shot Grace a hateful look. She wants to drive us apart. And you told her I was an uneducated fool, Grace continued, and that I'm holding you back into poverty. That's also made up. You don't really think that. Do you, Andriush? Stop it. He clenched his fists. You misunderstood everything. No, I understood everything correctly, Grace said calmly. This morning when I called from the neighbor's phone. And now? You know, I'm even grateful to you. You freed me from unnecessary doubts. Everything is perfectly clear now. What? Henry frowned. You called from the neighbor's phone? Why? To hear you cooing with someone else, Grace smirked. My sunshine. I've missed you terribly. My kitten, how are you there, all alone? Remember words like that? So that was you? Henry paled. You were spying on me. What else was I supposed to do? Grace spread her hands. You haven't been answering my calls for months, constantly in meetings, on business trips, but actually with her. She nodded toward Emma, who stood with her arms crossed, glaring angrily at Henry and then at Grace. And by the way, Grace turned to Emma, you knew he was married, that he had a child. Of course I knew, Emma snorted. He told me everything, how you don't understand him, how you hold him back. Emma, Henry barked, shut up. No, let her speak. Grace sat on the edge of an armchair. I'm interested to know what else you told her about me. That you're a thing of the past, Emma said. That you only think about money, about that stupid mortgage. And life is passing by. He wants to travel, to develop. And you? You're his jailer. Grace silently looked at her husband. He averted his eyes, clearly uncomfortable. So I'm the jailer, she said quietly. And the mortgage is stupid. And I thought it was you who wanted to move to a prestigious area. You wanted to send Sarah to an elite school. You said we needed to match our status. It's not that simple, Henry muttered. You don't understand. I understand perfectly, Grace stood up. You traded us for this. She gestured around the room. For show, for emptiness. And now you're even blaming me. What have you become? What do you think of yourself? Emma shrieked. Think you're better than me? Look at yourself, a grey mouse, a labourer. No education, no taste. And you, I take it, have both, Grace asked coldly. And what do you do with this wealth? Have affairs with married men? How dare you? Emma took a step toward her, but Henry held her back. Calm down, he said. It's pointless, Henry turned to Grace. Since it's come to this, yes, I wanted to talk to you. We're too different, and I've really fallen in love with another woman. Just like that, Grace shook her head. What about Sarah? Have you thought about her? I will always help her, Henry said quickly. I'll pay alimony, I'll visit. And how will you explain to her why you abandoned us? Grace asked quietly. What will you say when she asks, Daddy, why don't you love Mommy anymore? Henry was taken aback for a second, but quickly regained his composure. Children understand everything, he stated. It's better to live happily in different houses than unhappily in one. And were we? Unhappy? Grace smiled sadly. Or did you convince yourself of that to justify your betrayal? Don't start, Henry winced. We need to resolve this civilly. We'll sell the apartment, split the money. Sell it? Grace raised her eyebrows. And where will I go with the child? Well, you'll rent something, Henry shrugged. Apartments are cheap in the old district. I see, Grace nodded. And you, I suppose, will live with her in a new apartment. What about the mortgage? Who will pay that? I will, of course, Henry said quickly. Me and Emma together. That's not going to happen, Emma put her hands on her hips. Why on earth would I pay for your ex-wife's apartment? Let her sell it. We'll buy a new one, an even better one. Emma, not now, Henry hissed. No, right now, she insisted. Since we've started this, let's agree on everything. I'm tired of waiting. Grace watched this argument with a strange calmness, as if it were happening not to her, but to characters in some movie. You know, Henry, she finally said, I'm not going to sell anything because this is my apartment, not yours. What? He choked. Have you lost your mind? We took the mortgage together. But I was the one who mostly paid it, Grace said calmly, and in the documents, I'm the primary borrower, and you're the co-borrower. And you know what's most interesting? For the last 6 months, you haven't made any payments at all. All payments came from my card. Henry was silent, clearly not expecting this turn. I can buy out your share, Grace continued, the part you actually paid, but the apartment stays with me and Sarah. You have no right, Henry exploded. I'll go to court. Go ahead, Grace shrugged. I have all the bank statements, all your business trips, all your business expenses. I've gathered everything, and I think the court will be interested to know where the money meant for the mortgage went. You were spying on me? Fear sounded in Henry's voice. You were digging through my accounts? No, only through mine, Grace answered calmly, and the mortgage statements. I am the primary borrower after all. The bank provided everything, and it paints a very interesting picture. Do you know how much you spent on restaurants and hotels last year? I can tell you the exact amount. Henry was silent, pale. Emma looked bewilderedly from him to Grace. So, Grace continued, I suggest we resolve this peacefully. You pack your things and leave with your colleague. She nodded toward Emma. The apartment remains with me and Sarah. I'll pay out your share, about 20% of the amount paid. That's fair. And you have no further claim on us. And Sarah? Henry asked hollowly. Will you forbid me to see her? No, Grace shook her head. You're her father, but you'll have to explain to her yourself why you abandoned us and why you brought your mistress into our home when she was here. I didn't know she was awake, Henry muttered. I thought she was already asleep. Oh, that changes everything, Grace said sarcastically. You were planning to make love with this woman in the next room from your sleeping child? That's so much better. Emma suddenly grabbed her purse and headed for the exit. Where are you going? Henry asked confusedly. Home, she threw over her shoulder. Sort it out yourselves. I'm sick of all this. Wait, he rushed after her into the hallway. Let's not be hasty. Grace remained sitting in the armchair, listening to their bickering in the hallway. You promised everything would be beautiful. Emma's voice reached her, and it turned into dirt and scandal. I don't need this. Hear me? Don't call me again. The front door slammed. A minute later, Henry returned, confused with red blotches on his face. Satisfied? He threw at Grace. Ruined everything. Me? She looked at him calmly. I think you managed that yourself. They were silent for a few minutes. Finally, Henry heavily sank onto the couch. And now what? He asked. Now you pack your things and leave, Grace repeated. Tomorrow you'll come, take the rest, and then we'll get a divorce. And Sarah? His voice sounded lost. How do I explain it to her? Think of something, Grace shrugged. You're good at lying. Henry didn't answer. He looked lost, like a child whose favorite toy has been taken away. That's exactly it, Grace thought. The game is over and he doesn't like it. Grace returned to work just before dawn. Bella, seeing her, threw up her hands. Lord Masha, what's wrong with you? You look terrible. Everything's fine, Grace smiled tiredly. Just problems at home. She sat down at the computer, mechanically taking orders, assigning cars. Her thoughts were far away. The image of Henry packing his things into a sports bag stood before her eyes, his confused face, his phrases, "You misunderstood everything." I'll explain. It's temporary. At one point he even tried to hug her, but Grace pulled away. Don't. Just go. And he left without a scene, without breaking dishes. Just took his bag and walked out the door, throwing over his shoulder. I'll call tomorrow. We need to talk calmly. Inside, Grace felt emptiness. No pain, no rage, nothing, as if something had snapped, and now a void gaped in her soul. Mash for you, Bella's voice snapped her out of her thoughts. Jack stood in the doorway with a tray on which 2 cups of coffee steamed. Decided to stop by before my shift, he smiled. Brought you and Bella Wilson some coffee, real coffee, from a coffee shop. Oh, thank you, Jack. Bella was delighted. Otherwise, we only have instant crap here. Jack put the tray on the table and handed a cup to Grace. With milk and cinnamon. Right? How did you know? She was surprised. You mentioned yesterday that you like it that way. He shrugged. I have a good memory for details. Grace gratefully accepted the cup. The coffee smelled wonderful, warm, spicy, calming. How are you? Jack asked quietly, sitting down next to her. All right. More or less, Grace nodded. Thank you again for yesterday. Don't mention it, he smiled. Glad I could help. They were silent. Bella tactfully moved to another table, pretending to be very busy with papers. You know, Jack suddenly said, I had an order today at 5 in the morning. Can you imagine? Drove a woman to the airport. She was flying to Sochi to her mother, said her husband cheated on her. She found out by accident. Found texts on his phone and decided to leave, get some air, think. And? Grace asked, not understanding where he was going with this. Well, she cried the whole way. Jack shook his head, and said her life was over, that she didn't know how to go on. And I looked at her and thought, why do people get so fixated on betrayal? Why do they think if they've been betrayed, that's it, the end? Grace shrugged. I suppose because it hurts. It hurts, of course, Jack agreed. But life goes on, and often after such events, it even gets better. Take me, for example. After the divorce, I thought, that's it, collapse. Then I understood. No, it's a new beginning. He spoke simply, without pathos, and his words sounded especially convincing. Maybe you're right, Grace said thoughtfully, but right now it's hard for me to imagine that. Of course, Jack nodded, everything in its own time. He stood up. Well, I won't bother you. See you tonight on shift. Yes, see you tonight. Grace smiled, and thanks for the coffee. When Jack left, Bella immediately sat down next to her. Well, tell me, what happened? Grace sighed. Sooner or later, everyone would find out, so no point in hiding it. Henry and I are separating, she said simply. He has another woman. You don't say, Bella gasped. What a dog. He seemed so decent. Always my beloved wife, my Grace. And for how long? I don't know exactly, Grace shrugged. But I think a few months, maybe longer. What a bastard, Bella was outraged. And who is she? Do you know? Some Emma. Grace winced. Pretty, young. Seems they work together. Listen, Bella lowered her voice. Aren't you afraid he'll sue for the apartment? Everything is split 50-50 in a divorce now. No, Grace shook her head. I'm the primary borrower, and I paid most of it. I have all the documents. Well, thank God, Bella crossed herself. I've heard so many stories. One girl with a child was thrown out on the street. Her husband and lawyers took everything. Grace nodded. She was lucky she had always been pedantic about financial matters. She recorded everything, kept all receipts. Now it would work in her favor. And Sarah? Bella asked. Does she know? Not yet, Grace sighed. I mean, she saw him with that woman. But I haven't told her yet that we're divorcing. Poor girl, Bella shook her head. Such shocks at that age. Grace nodded. That worried her most of all. How would Sarah handle the divorce? She and Henry, of course, hadn't been an ideal couple in recent years, but they were still a family. All right, she shook herself, let's work, or we'll end up with our own soap opera here. By evening, Grace was completely exhausted. A sleepless night, stress, uncertainty about the future, it all piled on at once. She called her mother-in-law, found out Sarah was fine, had even gone for a walk in the yard with friends during the day. Grace, Nora Prescott said quietly, Henry called, said you had a fight. Is it true? Yes, Grace simply answered. We're separating. Nora Prescott, I'm sorry. Lord, a sob was heard in the receiver. What is this? How could it be? You were such a... I thought. He didn't tell you why? Grace asked. He said you grew apart. Her mother-in-law's voice trembled, but I can see that's not it. Tell me the truth, Grace. Is it another woman? Grace was silent. Was it worth telling? On the other hand, her mother-in-law would find out sooner or later. Yes, she finally said. He's been having an affair for a while, it seems. Oh, what a sorrow. Nora Prescott began to lament. Takes after his father. He was like that too. God rest his soul. He was a good man, but with women. I hoped Henry would turn out different. And look what he's done. Nora Prescott, Grace said softly, it's not your fault. And I hope we can remain on good terms. You're Sarah's grandmother. Of course, dear, her mother-in-law responded immediately. I will never abandon you. No matter what happens, I'm always on your side. I already gave Andreyushka a piece of my mind. Such a wife. Such a daughter. Grace smiled. Her mother-in-law had always been on her side. A rare case. Usually, in family conflicts, mothers support their sons. Thank you, she said sincerely. You have no idea how much that means to me. I know, Nora Prescott sighed. I had a mother-in-law myself. A beast, not a woman. Always defended her sonny, blamed me for everything. I swore I would never be like that. They talked a bit more, and Grace hung up with a sense of relief. At least she wouldn't have to fight on that front. And it would be easier for Sarah if her grandmother didn't turn her against her mother. In the evening, just before the shift started, an excited Huxley burst into the dispatch office. Grace, you won't believe it. Your hubby is here. What? Grace jumped up. Where is here? Here, at the taxi depot. Huxley was beaming with excitement. With flowers. In his car. Says he wants to talk to you. Just what I needed, Grace muttered. What does he want? To make up, probably. Huxley shrugged. Brought a whole trunkload of flowers. To make up? Grace smiled bitterly. After what he's done. And what did he do? Huxley immediately became interested. Never mind, Grace cut him off. Where is he? At the security gate. Huxley waved his hand. Security won't let him in without a pass. Everyone's already gathered, watching. He's making a scene. He's staging a circus, Grace thought, but she had no choice. She had to go out, or there would be even more gossip. I'll be right back, she said to Bella and headed for the exit. Henry was indeed standing by the depot gates, leaning against his car. Seeing Grace, he rushed to her with a huge bouquet of roses. Masha, I need to talk to you. Why did you come here? She asked coldly. I'm at work. Grace, listen. He spoke too loudly, clearly playing to the audience. Onlookers had already gathered. I've realized everything. It was a moment of madness. I love only you and Sarah. Forgive me. Henry, Grace crossed her arms over her chest. Let's not put on a show. If you want to talk, let's do it tomorrow in a calm setting. No, now. He grabbed her hand. I can't wait. I'm tormented. Grace, I was such a fool. She means nothing to me. It was a mistake. What happened? Grace thought. Why such a sharp turn? Just yesterday he was packing his things and talking about divorce, and today he's standing here with flowers and declaring his love. Suddenly it dawned on her. Emma had dumped him. After yesterday's scandal, she apparently realized that getting involved with a married man was more trouble than it was worth. And Henry decided to return to the family, the backup plan. Let's go to the car, Henry said, seeing her silence. We need to talk in private. No, Grace shook her head. I'm not going anywhere with you. And take your flowers back. Masha, please. He made a pitiful face. For our daughter's sake, for our family's sake. Will you really throw everything away because of one mistake? At that moment, Jack 7 drove out of the depot gates. He slowed down, seeing this scene. Everything all right? He asked, leaning out the window. Yes, thanks, Grace nodded. Everything's fine. Who are you? Henry turned sharply to him. What do you want? Just wanted to make sure Grace is okay, Jack answered calmly. What's it to you? Henry puffed up. This is my wife. We're talking. Former wife, Grace said quietly but firmly, and Jack is right. I'm fine, and you'd better leave. Now is not the time or place for such conversations. And when is the time? Henry wouldn't let up. When should I come? Tonight? Tomorrow? Tell me, I'll come. Grace, don't be so cruel. Grace looked at him and didn't recognize the cold, self-confident man from yesterday who declared it was better to separate. Before her stood a frightened, confused person, afraid of losing his accustomed life. All right, she finally said. Come tomorrow at 6 in the evening. And without flowers, please. We need to discuss serious things, not stage a melodrama. Thank you, Henry beamed. Thank you, darling. You won't regret it. I'll fix everything. He tried to hug her, but Grace stepped back. Until tomorrow, Henry. Turning around, she walked back toward the dispatch building. The noise of a car driving away was heard behind her. Henry had finally left. What a mess, the security guard at the gate muttered, just like in the movies. Grace didn't answer. Inside, she was boiling with anger and resentment. How dare he, after all he'd done? Show up with flowers, make a scene in front of everyone, try to play on pity. Grace, a familiar voice called out to her. She turned around. Jack had gotten out of the car and was standing a few steps away. Sorry I interfered, he said. Just saw it and thought you might need help. Everything's fine, Grace smiled tiredly. Thanks for your concern. They walked together toward the dispatch office. You know, Jack suddenly said, I don't want to stick my nose where it doesn't belong, but be careful. Such sudden changes in behavior are a bad sign. What do you mean? Grace looked at him. When a person abruptly changes behavior from coldness to passionate declarations, from decisive statements to pleas for forgiveness, it's usually a sign of manipulation, Jack said seriously. I know what I'm talking about. My ex-wife did the same. When she needed something, she became the most loving wife in the world. And having gotten what she wanted, she turned back into a cold bitch, Grace thought. Perhaps he was right. Henry had never staged such scenes before, never thrown around words of love. Even in their best times, he was restrained in showing feelings. And now such an outburst of emotions. You're right, she nodded. I'll be careful. Thank you. 2 months later, Grace was sitting in a small cafe waiting for Henry. He was late as usual. Even now, when it concerned his own child, he couldn't arrive on time. Life was gradually improving. The divorce had gone surprisingly smoothly. Henry didn't contest her right to the apartment, perhaps afraid of the publicity around his financial machinations. He agreed to pay alimony and see Sarah once a week, though in these 2 months he had met with his daughter only 3 times. Always busy. Work, business trips. Grace looked at her watch. Henry was already 20 minutes late. She sipped her cooling coffee and sighed. Perhaps she should order another one. Excuse me, may I join you? A familiar voice sounded. Grace looked up. Jack was standing nearby with a tray on which 2 cups of coffee steamed. I saw you through the window, he smiled. Decided to keep you company, if you don't mind. Of course, she nodded to the free chair. I was just about to order more coffee. Already taken care of. He set a cup in front of her, with milk and cinnamon, as you like. Grace smiled gratefully. Over these 2 months, she and Jack had become good friends. He often drove her home after shifts, helped with minor repairs in the apartment. Once he even went to a parent-teacher meeting at school when Grace had a night shift and there was no one to leave Sarah with. "Waiting for someone?" Jack asked, sitting down opposite her. "Henry," Grace nodded. "We agreed to discuss summer plans for Sarah. He promised to send her to camp, but he's been silent. I need to plan." "I see." Jack sipped his coffee. "How is Sarah, by the way?" "Still upset." "Less now," Grace sighed. "It was hard at first. She cried, asked why Dad left when he was coming back. But it's better now. School is better too." After the divorce, Grace transferred Sarah to a regular school closer to home, where most kids from their neighborhood went. Sarah resisted at first, but quickly adjusted and even found friends. "And work?" Jack asked. "Not too tired with the night shifts?" "All right," she shrugged. "It even got better when Baker made me senior dispatcher. Better pay, more convenient schedule. That was another good news in recent weeks. The senior dispatcher quit, and the depot manager offered the position to Grace. Now she didn't have to work nights, only day and evening shifts, and the pay was a third higher." "How are things with you?" Grace asked. "Still taxiing?" "Not anymore," Jack smiled. "Remember I told you about my grandfather's safe? Turns out the code was written in an old diary. I found it by accident when cleaning out the attic." "And what was in there?" Grace became interested. "Gold coins," he smirked. "Pre-revolutionary, czarist ones. Apparently Grandpa saved them through hard times. At first I thought of giving them to a museum, but an appraiser said they weren't of particular historical value. There are many like them, but they're worth a pretty penny because of the gold." "And how many were there?" Grace leaned forward involuntarily. 23 pieces, Jack answered. "I've already sold half, got a decent sum, opened a small firm for repairing ventilation systems. After all, I'm an engineer. It's my specialty. Already hired 2 assistants." "Congratulations." Grace was sincerely happy. "That's wonderful." "Thanks," he smiled. "You know, I've been thinking about your words. Remember you said you'd like to return to the tourism business?" "Yeah, I did," Grace nodded. "But it's not the right time now." "On the contrary, I think it's the perfect time." Jack leaned toward her. "I figured I need an office manager for the firm, answer phones, handle paperwork. And you just said you worked in a travel agency, have experience with clients. Why don't you give it a try? Flexible schedule, decent pay." Grace looked at him in surprise. "Are you offering me a job?" "Exactly," Jack nodded. "Sure, it's not a travel agency, but it's also not night shifts in a smoky dispatch office. What do you think?" Grace hesitated. The offer was tempting: a normal schedule, office work, a reasonable boss. "Listen," she hesitated, "it's very generous of you, but I don't want you offering me a job out of pity." "Pity?" Jack raised his eyebrows in surprise. "What gave you that idea?" "I need a competent employee, not a charity case. I'm offering you the job because I'm sure you can handle it, and I'll feel better having someone I trust nearby." His words made sense. Over these months, they had indeed grown closer and could rely on each other. Grace had covered for him a few times, swapping shifts when Jack went to visit his son in St. Petersburg, and he helped her with Sarah and household chores. "I'll think about it," she finally said. "Thanks for the offer." "Don't rush your answer." Jack leaned back in his chair. "The office is still being renovated anyway, we'll be ready in a couple of weeks." At that moment, the cafe door opened and Henry walked in. Seeing Grace with Jack, he frowned and headed to their table. "Hi," he grunted, not looking at Jack. "Sorry I'm late." "Traffic." "Hello?" Grace nodded. "We've been waiting for you for a while." "We?" Henry measured Jack with a cold look. "Didn't know we had a group discussion." "I was just leaving," Jack said calmly, getting up. "Grace, I'll call you. Think about my offer." He nodded to Henry and left the cafe. Grace watched him go and turned to her ex-husband. "Well? Shall we discuss Sarah's vacation?" "Who is that jerk?" Henry asked instead of answering, sitting down. "Where do you know him from?" "We worked together at the taxi depot," Grace answered calmly. "Now he's started his own firm." "And what offer did he make you?" Irritation was poorly concealed in Henry's voice. "A job at his firm." Grace shrugged. "Why?" Come on, Henry grimaced. I saw how he looks at you. Not even divorced yet and already found someone. Henry, Grace looked him in the eye. Even if that were the case, it's none of your business. We're divorced, remember. You wanted this yourself. I never wanted any of this, he raised his voice so that people at neighboring tables turned around. You decided everything, made a scene, destroyed the family. I made a scene. Grace couldn't believe her ears. You brought your mistress into our home with our child present, and I made a scene. Quiet, please. Henry looked around. Let's not. Right, let's not. She took a deep breath, trying to calm down. I came to talk about Sarah. You promised to send her to camp, so yes or no? Of course, yes. He immediately softened his tone. I've already paid for everything. Here's the voucher. He took an envelope from his pocket and handed it to her. Grace opened it. Inside was indeed a voucher for a children's camp on the Black Sea. 2 weeks in August. Thank you, she nodded. Sarah will be happy. She misses the sea. I can take her to Sochi, Henry suddenly offered. Right now, in June, for a week. I have vacation coming up. And you won't be busy? Grace asked skeptically. Work, meetings, business trips. I'll cancel everything for my daughter, he said fervently. I miss her so much. And you too, by the way. There it is. Here we go again. Henry, Grace said firmly, we've already discussed this. I'm not coming back to you. That's decided. But why? He reached out, trying to take her hand, but Grace moved away. We were happy. We had a good family. Can one mistake really erase everything? It's not about the mistake, Grace shook her head. It's that you've changed, turned into a person. I don't know and don't want to know. An egoist who thinks only about himself, his status, his desires. The Henry I loved is gone. Not true, he raised his voice. I'm the same. I just got confused, lost my way. That Emma messed with my head, but now I understand everything. And what happened with Emma? Grace asked. Did you break up? Yeah, she turned out to be a bitch, Henry muttered. Turns out she had 2 others like me. And one of them is her boss. She was just using me. And me? Grace thought, but said out loud, I'm sorry, but that doesn't change anything between us. It's because of that taxi driver, right? Henry said contemptuously. Filled your head with nonsense. What did he promise you? Think he's better than me? What does Jack have to do with this? Grace asked tiredly. I don't want to return to you not because of him, but because of you. Because I don't trust you anymore. Because I don't want to fear every call from you, every business trip. Because I don't want my daughter to see her father kissing another woman in our living room. I want a calm, honest life, without lies, without betrayal, without humiliation. Henry was silent, looking at the table. Then he raised his eyes. And if I prove I've changed, if I show I'm worthy of trust, then what? Grace smiled sadly. Henry, understand some things can't be glued back together. They break forever. Our marriage is one of those things. Don't say that. A pleading note appeared in his voice. Give me a chance for Sarah's sake. Don't drag our daughter into this, Grace cut him off. She doesn't need parents who live together out of duty, by force. She needs a happy, confident mom and dad, even if they live separately. They were silent. Finally, Henry sighed. All right, I get it. But I won't give up, hear me? I'll win you back. Don't waste your energy, Grace shook her head. Better spend it on being a good father. Sarah needs you, your attention, your love. Not gifts and vouchers, but real participation in her life. I'll be there, Henry said seriously. I promise. We'll see. Grace got up. I have to go. Thanks for the voucher. She left the cafe without looking back. A fine drizzle was falling outside. Grace pulled up her hood and walked to the bus stop. Strangely, the conversation with Henry didn't evoke any emotions in her. No bitterness, no anger, no regret. As if she were talking to a stranger. I guess I've really accepted it, she thought, let go of the past and moved on. May turned out warm and sunny. Grace sat on a park bench and watched Sarah rollerblading with her new friends. After transferring to another school, her daughter seemed to blossom, became more open, cheerful, made friends. Mom, look, Sarah shouted, deftly turning on her skates. I learned how. Great, Grace waved to her. Just be careful. Her daughter raced off to catch up with her friends, and Grace thought back. That morning, Bella, whom she hadn't seen in a month, had called, since Grace quit the taxi depot and started working for Jack. Grace, you won't believe it, Bella said excitedly. Your ex is going crazy. Came by yesterday, asked about you, about this Jack of yours. Pumped me for information, where he lives, what he does. Then got drunk as a skunk and started crying. Said he's lost everything. Life is over. Really? Grace was surprised. What brought that on? They say, Bella giggled, that Emma finally dumped him, went to their firm's boss, and your Henry got fired. They say he started drinking, messing up projects. Grace frowned. She didn't exactly feel sorry for Henry, but such news was unpleasant. Whatever else, he was her child's father. Does he at least see Sarah? Bella asked, or forgot he has a daughter? Every other weekend, Grace answered, though not always sober. Last time I turned him away. You could smell the alcohol on him from a mile away. Sarah cried, of course, but I can't let my child go with a drunk father. Of course you can't, Bella agreed. You're a mother. Protect your daughter, Mash. He brought it on himself. Grace sighed, remembering that conversation. She felt sorry for Sarah. She was only 10 and already so many disappointments. First her parents' divorce, now her father drinking. Although Henry tried not to show his condition to his daughter. Brought gifts, took her to the movies, to amusement parks. But Sarah understood everything. By the smell, the unsteady gait, the wandering gaze. What are you thinking about? A familiar voice asked. Grace started and looked up. Jack stood before her with 2 cups of ice cream. Hi, she smiled. What are you doing here? Driving by, saw you. He sat down next to her, handing her a cup. Pistachio, as you like. Thanks, she nodded gratefully. And what about you? Day off? Not exactly, he shrugged. Met with suppliers. Good news, we got a big order to service a shopping mall. We'll be replacing the entire ventilation system. Congratulations. Grace was sincerely happy. That's great. Yep, Jack nodded. Lots of work, of course, but money too. By the way, you'll have to delve into the documentation, draw up contracts. I'll manage, Grace said confidently. It wasn't her first time. They sat in silence for a while, watching the kids on rollerblades. Sarah, noticing Jack, waved to him joyfully. Jack, hi, she shouted. Look what I can do. I see, he waved back. You're great. Sarah, pleased with the praise, sped off to her friends. Grace smiled. Her daughter clearly had a soft spot for Jack. He helped her with math, taught her to rollerblade, told interesting stories. He didn't replace her father. No, he was just there when needed. You know, I called the travel agency, Grace suddenly said. About that voucher to Turkey, they confirmed everything is set. Excellent, Jack nodded. So in July, you and Sarah are flying on vacation. Grace corrected him. You're coming too, right? Didn't forget? I booked a room for 3, as agreed. Of course, he smiled. I just still can't believe I'll see the sea. Last time I was on a beach was 15 years ago. I thought you traveled with your wife, Grace was surprised. No, Jack shook his head. She liked more expensive entertainment, cruises, ski resorts. I always just wanted the sea, the beach, a lounge chair with a book. Well, your dream will come true. Grace licked the melting ice cream. Only instead of a book, you'll have to build sandcastles with Sarah. She's a big specialist in that. With pleasure, Jack said sincerely. I've long dreamed of such a vacation, family-like, calm. He caught himself looking at Grace. She was embarrassed. The word family hung in the air. They had been dating for 3 months now. If you could call their joint dinners, trips to the movies with Sarah, walks in the park, dating. Jack was attentive, caring, but never crossed boundaries. As if giving her time to recover from the divorce, get used to her new life. You know, he suddenly said, looking somewhere into the distance, I wanted to tell you something. I've wanted to for a long time, but somehow couldn't bring myself to. Grace tensed. Is he going to break up with us? A panicked thought flashed. Maybe he met someone or decided to go back to his ex-wife. Jack paused. I love you, Masha. And Sarah too. You've become my family, understand? And I want this to be for real. He turned to her, looking straight into her eyes. "Will you marry me?" Grace froze, not knowing what to say. She had, of course, thought about it, imagined this conversation, but now she was at a loss. "I understand," Jack continued hastily, seeing her confusion. "Maybe it's too early. You need time. I'm not rushing. I just wanted you to know. I'm serious. This isn't a passing fancy." Grace looked at him, slightly disheveled, with melting ice cream in his hand, with sincere tenderness in his gaze, and suddenly she realized there could only be one answer. "Yes," she said simply. "I will marry you." Jack beamed. "Really? Are you sure?" "Absolutely," she smiled. "But first we need to talk to Sarah. It's her life too." "Of course," he nodded. "We'll do everything right." At that moment, a flushed Sarah ran up to them. "Mom, can I skate a little more? Please." "Half an hour, then home," Grace said. "Time for dinner." "Is Jack having dinner with us?" Sarah asked hopefully. "I want to show him my new drawing." She looked questioningly at Jack. "Of course I'm free," he smiled. "I'd love to see your drawing, Sarah." "Yay." The girl jumped for joy and raced back to her friends. Grace watched her go and suddenly remembered that day when it all began. The phone call from a stranger's number that changed her life. Then it seemed like her world was collapsing. And now? "What are you thinking about?" Jack asked quietly, taking her hand. "About how strangely things work out." She smiled. "Sometimes the most painful events turn out to be turning points for the better." "Life goes on," he squeezed her palm, "and often it only gets better if you're not afraid of change." Grace nodded. He was right. Life really did go on, a new, bright life full of hope. And all thanks to one phone call from a stranger's number. And then they bought a house. Not big, but cozy, with a garden and a veranda. The very one she and Henry had once dreamed of, but kept putting off. Never enough money or time or something more important came up. The house wasn't expensive. Outskirts of the city, an old neighborhood with private houses. But they liked it. Number, pretense, no showing off. Just a warm, bright house where there was enough room for everyone, with a view of the river and old apple trees that showered the yard with white-pink blossoms in spring. Jack moved his workshop here. 2 rooms in the annex turned into a small but functional office. Business was going well. Orders for ventilation system maintenance were increasing. Grace helped with paperwork, answered phones, kept the books. They even had to hire 2 assistants. Jack couldn't handle it alone anymore. Sarah started 6th grade at a new school and seemed happy. No more teasing, no bullying. Ordinary kids from ordinary families. She found friends, joined an art club, started learning English with a tutor. "I want to travel like you and Mom," she explained to Jack. Grace's phone rang, snapping her out of her thoughts. "Hi, it's me." Henry's voice sounded cheerful. "You didn't forget I'm picking up Sarah for the weekend tomorrow?" "Of course I remember," Grace answered, watching Sarah and Jack argue about where to plant the next tree. "She's already packed her backpack." Took her sleeping bag, said, "You're going to the dacha." "Right." A smile was heard in Henry's voice. "I rented a little house on the lake, with a boat, fishing rods. I'll teach her to fish. Remember when we went to the VA Begale? Caught a pike, a huge one." Grace smiled at the memory. They were 25, just married. Henry pulled out the pike, got scared of its toothy mouth, and almost dropped it back into the water. And she laughed, took pictures, then fried that pike over a campfire. How happy they were then, carefree. "I remember," she said, "just don't forget to take mosquito repellent for her. And make sure she wears a life jacket when swimming. She swims okay now, but still." "I promise everything will be fine," Henry said seriously. "I'll watch her like a hawk. And by the way, I wanted to ask you something." "Yes?" Grace became wary. Something in his voice changed. Uncertainty appeared, as if he was afraid of her reaction. "I've met a woman," he said after a pause. "Her name is Abigail. She works in our accounting department. We've been dating for 3 months. Nothing serious yet, but I thought maybe I could introduce her to Sarah, if you don't mind." Grace raised her eyebrows in surprise. It was strange to hear that Henry had a new woman. Why not, though? He had changed, become a different person. Maybe his relationships would be different now, too. Without lies, without betrayal. I don't mind, she finally said, watching Sarah show Jack where exactly to dig the hole for the sapling. But only if you're sure it's serious. Sarah doesn't need fleeting aunties in your life. I understand, Henry answered seriously. I wouldn't bring it up if I wasn't sure. Abigail, she's not like Emma, she's normal, hardworking, and she has kids. A son, Sarah's age. I just want to do everything right, not repeat mistakes. Wow, Grace thought. He really has changed. The old Henry would have just presented her with a fait accompli without asking her opinion. All right, she nodded, though he couldn't see her. Introduce them. We'll see how it goes. But talk to Sarah first, explain what's what. She's old enough to understand. Thank you, Henry said sincerely. I appreciate your trust. Really. When the conversation ended, Grace returned to the window. Jack and Sarah had finished with the apple trees and were now discussing something, sitting on a bench under an old lime tree. They often sat like that, heads together, talking enthusiastically about something of their own, about books, movies, birds that flew into their garden. Sarah adored Jack. He had become for her not just a stepfather, but a real friend. Helped with homework, especially math and physics, which he knew perfectly, taught her to ride a bike, told her about stars and planets, which he knew an astonishing amount about. Grace put her hand on her stomach, feeling a slight movement. 4th month. Already noticeable if you looked closely, especially in fitted clothes. They hadn't told anyone yet. Wanted to wait until the 5th month, but Sarah had already guessed. Too observant a girl. Yesterday she asked outright, "Are you having a baby?" Had to confess. She went out onto the porch, and Jack immediately looked up and smiled at her. Come here. We're here with Sarah deciding where to put the swings. She wants them right in the middle of the yard, and I say, better in the shade. I think under the big oak tree, Grace said, walking over to them. The garden smelled of freshly cut grass and apple blossoms. There's shade, and it won't hurt as much if she falls. Otherwise, our future gymnast will skin her knees. See, I told you. Jack winked at Sarah. Mom knows best. Okay, Sarah agreed with a laugh, brushing a stray strand from her forehead. Her hair had grown out, looking even more like her father's, dark, thick, wavy. Let it be under the oak, but on ropes, not chains. They're prettier. And squeak less. Deal, Jack nodded. We'll go this weekend, buy everything we need. Maybe put up a sandbox right away too. And we need to get the nursery ready, Sarah suddenly said, looking at her mother. Right? Jack raised his eyebrows in surprise. Nursery? Yeah, Sarah rolled her eyes with a how can you not see the obvious look. For the little one. He's coming soon. We need to prepare. Buy a crib, diapers and stuff. Grace laughed, looking at her husband's bewildered face. Sorry, honey. Seems our daughter is too clever for us. So it's true. Jack jumped up, hugging Grace. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Wanted to surprise you, she smiled, for our anniversary. But you can't hide anything from this young lady. This is wonderful. Jack spun her around the yard. I've dreamed of this so much. My dear, my love. Hey, careful, Grace laughed, breaking free. You can't jiggle pregnant women like that. Sorry, he hugged her carefully. I'm just so happy. Sarah watched them with a smile, then suddenly asked, Does Papa know? Not yet, Grace shook her head, but you can tell him if you want. I will, Sarah nodded. He'll be happy. He's good now. Yes, Grace agreed. He's good now. That evening, when Sarah was already asleep, she and Jack sat on the veranda. Stars hung over the garden, bright, large, the kind you don't see in the city. You know, Jack suddenly said, I've been thinking how strangely everything turned out. If not for that call from a stranger's number, we would never have met. You wouldn't have found out about your husband's affair. I wouldn't have given you a ride home that night. Yes, Grace took his hand. Life sometimes takes strange turns, and often for the better. For the better, he agreed, definitely for the better. They sat in silence, looking at the stars. A new life was growing inside Grace. Around them was their new house, their garden. And beyond the fence, the spring city hummed. Calm, cozy, not scary at all. How good that I finally found the courage to call Henry from that stranger's number back then, Grace thought. How good that life goes on, even when it seems it's over. What are you thinking about? Jack asked, noticing her thoughtful face. That life goes on, she smiled, and that I am very, very happy. If you liked the story, hit the thumbs up button and subscribe to the channel. It motivates us to create new and interesting stories every day. Don't miss the new video you'll see on the main screen right now. All the best and be happy.